also took umbrage that this legislation was being put forward as leveling of the playing field, because in fact it confers added advantage to home-based businesses.
That's Seattle City Council member Sarah Nelson bringing up an interesting perspective on home-based businesses, which the council is once again discussing this week. So should the council relax the land use rules that govern these kinds of businesses for another 6 months as we emerge from the pandemic? What impact would that have on brick and mortar businesses? And also, when will the council return to in-person meetings? And then, what's this new hiring proposal for the Seattle Police Department all about? Well, we are working on these questions and a whole lot more here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. Great to be with you once again. The views expressed here are my own, and I'm joined by David Croman of the Seattle Times. David, I guess one of the perks about recording the show remotely is there is zero chance I'm going to walk over to you and punch you in the face like we saw at the Oscars. Wow, man, that was crazy. Craziest one I've ever seen.
I know. I don't usually watch the Oscars, and for some reason I happened to tune in last night, and that's what I saw. So I guess I should tune in more often.
I guess, yeah. I don't know how to describe it. Exciting? I can't find the right adjective, but we're going to see a lot of fallout for that one. David, thanks as always for joining me. Thank you also to our patrons of the show. If you do listen, please jump on as a supporter. We'd really appreciate it. Pledge at the $10 level, and you're in the mug club of Seattle News, Views, and Brews. We'll send you one of these 11-ounce beauties here. We also will feature your mug on the program with our mug shot of the week. And this week, Amy has sent in a photo of some flowers set in her mug. Very beautiful. Thank you, Amy, for supporting the show. Thanks also for sending in the photo. And hey, Mug Club members, if you have a great photo of your mug, we want to see it in action. So please do send it in. And also, if you listen, please do support the podcast on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. We're on Converge Media too. You can watch the video version of this podcast on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. Let's get rolling with right here, right now. Well, the City Council this week is extending a measure meant to help out home-based businesses that have sprung up during the pandemic. You might remember from last year, just some backstory here, folks, a business called Yonder Cider in Greenwood was running out of the home of a business owner. The permitting for the alcohol was legit, had to be consumed off-site, but a very Seattle neighbor reported a complaint on this business. It was shut down briefly, but then a number of other very Seattle neighbors filed a petition for the business to reopen. So the council got involved, passed this bringing business home measure, allowing businesses running out of a home to get a pass on a few regulations. They're allowed now to put up signs. They're allowed to have walk-up business, not just appointment only, a few other measures as well. But the council this week is set to approve a 6-month extension of bringing business home. And David, I thought this was very interesting because unlike the situation where we saw it with outdoor dining, where they want to try to make it permanent, it doesn't seem like the council really wants to encourage more businesses to run out of a home. Your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's tricky. It seems like Dan Strauss has kind of taken this up as his issue. You know, I mean, the story with Yonder is interesting because it started in this sort of home-based business, but now they've grown and graduated into
brick and mortar,
and so in some ways it's sort of a perfect example of what could be achieved through these walk-up businesses, which is it's really expensive and it takes a lot of capital to start a business, but maybe if you can do it a little more slowly, you start it out of your home and then kind of build up that way. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that they sort of keep extending it just by 6 months rather than having the permanent conversation. I don't know if that kind of helps them avoid more of an environmental review or kind of what that does. My sense is like most people sort of, I mean, there's a reason why Yonder survived. I mean, most people sort of like the idea of being able to stroll down the street and walk up to a window
in their neighborhood.
In their neighborhood. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it seems like one of those things where a lot of people like the idea in theory, but maybe we'll run up against some Seattle process questions.
True. And I think there's a business side to this, too, because Councilmember Peterson was the lone vote against this measure last year. He actually abstained with his vote, folks, at the committee level last week to bring this to the full council this week. So his pushback is this could create problems for established businesses that are trying to build back, hire people as we emerge from the pandemic. And this is a very interesting part of this because these are businesses that have, played by the rules, right? They put down that lease money for some commercial space right there and things of that nature. But this was interesting last week in looking at this. Apparently, from what I understood from the committee meeting, there really isn't a formal registration process that happens with these home-based businesses. You just have to meet certain performance standards there. So we don't even know how many businesses are actually operating out of their homes in Seattle. And I think that's the big question going forward here, David. How do you quantify the impact of home-based businesses on the larger business community? Because I think that's a very important piece of this.
And I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah,
I'm skeptical that there's like an enormous market of
right.
people doing business out of their homes.
Mm-hmm.
And if they are, I mean, they're sort of by definition quite a small business. I don't think Yonder was really until they grew and started doing a little more brick and mortar retail stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I really think they were only catering to people in their neighborhood.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
didn't live in that area, and I'd never heard of them, but
right.
only saw pictures. So it just
Mm-hmm.
seems to me, I don't know that there's like some enormous threat to
Right.
established businesses
Mm-hmm.
through these. I'm
Yeah.
slightly skeptical of that claim. I mean, I think there are a
Right.
lot of reasons why it's really hard to run a
Yeah.
brick and mortar business in Seattle
Mm-hmm.
right now.
Mm-hmm.
The pandemic, commercial rent is really high. There's a lot
Yeah.
of B&O taxes, regulations. I mean,
Oh
businesses
yeah.
have a lot of very legitimate grievances right now. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know that a few people selling cider out of their windows is
Right.
gonna
Right.
top a lot of people's list.
We'll see. It's an interesting discussion to have because you look at some of the different entities that, at least city council members, that are purportedly trying to help out businesses or whatever else. Sarah Nelson is one of them. She's supportive of this, but definitely has some reservations. I know Councilmember Peterson does too. So yeah, I'm interested too, David, to see how this really plays out. But I wanted to talk about another interesting thing on the council's docket this week. The full council talking about another land use issue here: tree protection in the city of Seattle. So this is a new ordinance going on the books requiring arborists who work in the city to register with the city of Seattle to, quote, evidence, and also, excuse me, they should have, quote, evidence of appropriate education and training. David, really another chapter here, I think, in this ongoing battle for the city to protect and increase the tree canopy here. How do you see a measure like this affecting that effort?
I don't know. I mean, I would hope that. I mean, on the one hand, being an arborist can be a really dangerous job, and so I would hope
True.
that people have proper training when they
Mm-hmm.
are selling themselves as being an arborist.
Right.
Although
Okay.
I do
Okay.
think that there's like licensing requirements and things like that.
Of course. Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I mean, I think the thing that comes to mind, I guess, is I remember a few years ago in West Seattle when those people kind of surreptitiously cut down all those trees
Mm-hmm.
to improve their view, and so maybe this would kind of add an additional layer on this. I mean, as you kind of referenced, City Council has been talking about tree protection and tree ordinances for a long time.
Long, long time. Yeah. Yeah.
They haven't. It's unclear whether they have really made much of an impact or have really done what they set out to do.
Right. Right.
So yeah,
And
I don't frankly know what the effect of this legislation will be.
well, it's interesting because I think there's a deeper piece to this, David, and you and I have talked about bits of this before, but uh, tree canopy, things of this nature impact so many different issues. I'm thinking about race and social justice issues. I'm thinking about the need for development and more affordable housing in our area too, because when you look at some of the national studies on this, it's really interesting to see areas with fewer trees have temperatures that can be a lot hotter than other areas of the city, like 20 degrees hotter. When you talk about some of the different heat waves we've had in Seattle and in other cities too, that can make a big difference. And I look at that, and then I also look at how tree protection can kind of be this anti-development tool. Like, hey, we don't want that
Right.
building there. We want to save all these trees. I don't know. When you apply that race and social justice lens to this, which I think is very important to do, I think you can come up with a very complex answer. And I don't know if it's a complete answer either.
Yeah, I think the point about I think both of those that's a great point, that it is sort of two sides to a coin.
Mm-hmm.
But it is true that the protecting the tree canopy has been, I mean, there are sort of a lot of issues that people who don't like the idea of more development or more
Mm-hmm.
density point to
Yeah.
as reasons not to allow more density, and tree canopy has become one of those for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it is, as exactly as you said, it kind of gets caught up in much larger sort of questions, or for me, most interestingly, around affordable housing development and who benefits
Right.
from development and where.
Yeah, no, it's not a simple issue at all. I know council, in talking about this week, is also talking about the enforcement of this. This could mean some more staff for SDCI, the Department of Corrections and Inspection, or excuse me, Department of Construction and Inspections. There's going to be a complaint-based kind of a system. So we'll see what happens here. I know there are a lot of Seattle neighbors that are very, very in touch with this issue. So we're going to see what happens there next.
And there are already no shortages of avenues for people to take to raise issue with new development between design review and SEPA, environmental review, and it's a fairly onerous permitting process in Seattle, and hearing examiners, and so this, I could see this.
Here's another layer, right?
This could add another layer to that. But then, as you said, yeah, I mean, we had the heat dome last year, and I think parts of Rainier Beach, and I mean, I know this is outside of Seattle, but South King County and things like that saw 10 degrees hotter days than parts of Wedgwood or whatever it might be.
It's amazing to watch that map. I remember seeing that too, and that's no joke. And this is something that can literally be a matter of life and death. So I think it's an interesting issue with a lot of different pieces that the council's looking at this week. We'll see what pans out with that issue as they vote on that this week. But I want to talk about up next. You talk about the city council voting. Well, when are they going to start voting in person? When will those meetings be in person again? No easy answers on this one either. We're going to try to break it down on Now Hear This. So the big question I know all of you are asking out there in Seattle News, Views, and Brews land: when can I go to a Seattle City Council meeting in person? It's been more than 2 years. I feel you, gentle podcast listener. I miss them too. And when the mayor said a few weeks ago in mid-March, hey, city employees, it's time to return to in-person work if you haven't already, you would think that would mean holding meetings in person would be imminent. But it's never that easy. We're talking about city government here, folks. So I asked Councilmember Lisa Herbold about this issue last week on the show Council Edition on Seattle Channel.
I'm definitely supportive of folks coming back to the building and holding council meetings in person, as long as there's an option for remote participation for both council members and the public who need it.
So, David, let's try to peel apart some of these issues. As I understand it, the mayor's directive to city employees a few weeks ago to come back to work did not apply to the legislative branch, the city council here, and it's not really clear when the council meetings might actually be back in person. Publicola has reported that Council President Juarez sent an email to legislative staff saying, return to the office or work out some of these alternative work schedules, I guess, by April 27th. That 6 weeks after the rest of the city. Bargaining with unions, as I understand it, with these legislative staffers here. Part of the reason this is going a little bit more slowly. But overall, David, where do you see this issue going of having in-person meetings for the Seattle City Council and getting people back to work? It isn't a simple process, for sure.
No, it's not. And I think, as Publicola alluded to, the legislative staff is newly unionized, or
that's right,
new-ishly unionized. And so that, of course, I'm sure is playing a factor. The thing, and I don't know, I mean, I haven't heard, I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, I interviewed Councilmember Juarez, councilmember at the time, now Council President Juarez, and she has multiple sclerosis.
She has some health issues, that's right.
And at the beginning of the pandemic, she was rightfully sort of quite nervous about what this meant for her. And I think that even before the council went fully remotely, she was calling into meetings. She was kind of one of the first people to do that. And so I do wonder if that has something to do with the sort of approach that she's taking, because now she's council president. It's kind of up to her to do this. And, she talked about possibly wristbands for people to kind of signal their level of comfort.
Right.
And
like
I thought
red,
that was
red
really
means I'm not comfortable, yellow and green and whatever else. This is an interesting one too.
Right. So, I don't know. I haven't talked to her in a while, so I don't know kind of where her comfort level is at now. But I do imagine it at the very least kind of makes her more conscious of the fact that there are folks out there who might have some particular discomfort. And so I think, that may be one explanation for why the council is being a little more cautious about this, because the person who's making decisions has an immune disease, autoimmune disease. And so is, by nature more at risk.
Absolutely. I just want to try to think through, though, some of the logistics of having a hybrid meeting where it's part in person and part virtual, because I've tried to do these kinds of meetings myself, and it's really difficult. The communication you have with people in person, there's no other way around it. It's different than what you have with a person virtually. And any thoughts about this, like what a meeting like this could look like if it was indeed a hybrid type of meeting?
Um, I think the legislature actually has
Yeah.
probably shown a pretty good example.
Right.
You know, well, I think that the legislature shows that there are certain advantages and accessibility
Hmm.
benefits to allowing
Absolutely.
remote
Hmm.
testimony.
Yep.
You know, the legislature even more so because, you know, someone who lives in Kettle Falls or whatever
Yep.
who wants to
Hmm.
weigh in on something in Olympia, they have more chance to do that.
Hmm.
But you know,
Thank
when
you
they
to our listeners real quick in Kettle Falls. But yeah, keep
yeah,
going, David. Yeah, thank
that
you.
was just the most northeast
You got it,
location I
buddy.
could
Nailed
think
it.
of.
Nailed it.
Um,
Yep. Hmm.
uh, and but you know they were taking House and Senate floor votes
Hmm.
with about half the members there and half
Right.
calling in, and
Hmm.
I wasn't there in person, so I didn't get a sense for what that felt like to be there in person. But like watching it on TVW, it seemed like it went fairly smoothly, and so
Yeah.
I do think that especially at this point, we're 2 months or 2 years uh, into remote work.
Yes. Hmm.
You know, I am feeling fairly confident that at this point there is someone somewhere who knows how to make a
Right.
hybrid system work. And the
Yeah.
legislature, I think, showed that it can be done and
Yeah.
done fairly effectively.
Yeah, I think it's going to be that question of being equitable about it, making sure that people who are tuning in virtually can have at least a similar experience to what's happening in person. But that's it'll be interesting to see how Council President Juarez continues with this one, because this is something that's very personal to her, I know, but I know there's a lot of council members who are itching to get back. So we'll see. We'll see what pans out with that one. But I wanted to talk about another thing that the council is going to be dealing with in the weeks upcoming. The council soon considering a hiring incentive program for the Seattle Police Department. So a little more backstory here, folks. We touched on this a few weeks ago. So the council approved hiring bonuses for cops last year, but only through December. But then Mayor Durkin told the SPD, go ahead and just continue these into 2022. The council was made aware of this, retroactively approved those bonuses through January, but continuing them has not been brought up until now. Citywide Council member Sarah Nelson introduced a resolution last week to lift a budget proviso that restricts the SPD's use of anticipated 2022 salary savings unless authorized by a future ordinance. So her resolution would allow SPD to use those savings on hiring bonuses to try to bring in more officers laterally, meaning from other departments into Seattle. David, what do you make of this move from Councilmember Nelson?
I think it goes to show how you know things have shifted on the council.
Mm-hmm. Council President Juarez is supportive of this plan too. I've noted. So
right, and
mm-hmm.
I think some of the other council, you know, a lot was made early on of, you know, a super majority of the city council
mm-hmm.
Being in favor of defunding the police department by 50%.
Yes,
you know, I think that probably overstated the support
mm-hmm.
that there really was. I mean, you can get into messaging and whether or not they were kind of just how they were saying that, but I think at the end of the day, there are council members, enough council members on the council who at this point are looking at how precipitous the drop in staffing is at the Seattle Police Department and getting a bit nervous about that. And I do think that the election of last year kind of showed where
some of the
Nelson
political winds are blowing.
And Mayor Harrell did very well on messages of we're not going to defund the police. And, you know, even I think of Councilmember Herbold or Strauss or Lewis, who I think had voiced support for changes to how policing is done. But when police officers started leaving in droves, felt pretty uncomfortable with how quickly that was happening and the city's ability to respond. And so, you know, I think, I think this is a shift for the council in a way that is sort of that is based in an acknowledgement of you know the changes they wanted to make. I think they wanted to roll out in a sort of controlled manner, and now it is out of their control in some ways because police officers are leaving on their own, and so they're maybe, you know, I think these incentives is possibly a way for them to feel like they can kind of get their hands around, wrap their arms around the staffing at the Seattle Police Department.
Right. And I know some council members are going to be supportive of this and some are not, definitely. And talking in council edition last week, tune into that, folks. If you hadn't checked it out, talked with Councilmember Herbold and Councilmember Morales about those ideas of hiring bonuses. But looking at Councilmember Herbold here, David, she's the chair of the Public Safety Committee. She's always quick to point out that the council has approved every hiring plan that the SPD has brought before them. The council has not directly cut funding for officer salaries, is the way she's parsing it. Now, of course, when officers have left, the council has taken some of those dollars from savings and worked towards putting them towards non-police options for public safety. And Herbold's also brought up this idea that, hey, SPD needs more personnel, but so do other departments in the city. Why don't they get hiring bonuses too? And I think it brings up this question of, put it in air quotes here, is it fair to allow SPD to use money when it's not spending on officer salaries on officer recruitment like this with hiring bonuses?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean that is the question for sure. I think I think what they're responding to in some ways is the fact that a lot of police departments in the area are doing this. I mean, in some ways, it's a bit of an arms race.
Yeah, right. Who can pay the most?
Which is that there is a demand for officers everywhere. It seems like these days, and departments have an enormous incentive to steal officers from each other because of how much it costs to recruit and train rookies. And then, they're rookies, so they're not very experienced. So it is a major benefit to departments to get officers to transfer into their departments from other departments. And so as a result, we're seeing, nearby departments providing hiring incentives and basically trying to lure people, seeing some of the political disconnect between the city council and some slightly more conservative members of the Seattle Police Department, and trying to take advantage of that. And so I think in some ways it's, I don't know if it's fair or not, but I think they are responding to a reality that exists, which is that other departments are doing this too, and they feel like they need something to kind of keep up.
Right. And we're talking about bonuses, at least the last time around, that were $10,000 up to $25,000, bringing these different people in. It was interesting talking about this on Council Edition, David, because Councilmember Herbold told me that Interim Chief Diaz sort of looks at this almost as a relocation fee, right? If you're trying to bring in people from different areas, Seattle's a very expensive place to live. So that extra bonus off the top is almost used in that way. And that might be a way that the Seattle Police Department has to sell it, if you will, because I think that's a piece of this too. Housing is expensive for everybody, including police officers. And if you want to attract people to the area, they might need those extra dollars just to make that happen.
Yeah, I think that's right. What's interesting to me is that we have seen some, and including the police department briefly, we have seen some retention bonuses out there, but not as many. And so, even there is this sort of odd incentive to just like have officers shuffling around because you make more money going somewhere else than you would staying in your own job. And so, even if somebody isn't necessarily dissatisfied with where they're looking, if a department down the road is offering you $25,000 to move, and we know that most police officers don't live in Seattle anyway.
This is true.
Maybe they are. Maybe they live in Everett or something, and the Everett Police Department is offering them $15,000. I don't know if Everett is actually doing that, but
sure.
By way of example, to transfer there, I mean, why not? When you're not going to get any money for staying at your current job.
Oh man, this will be interesting to tease out. So we'll see what Councilmember Nelson does with this. We'll see what the full council does with this in the weeks ahead, but we'll keep track of that one. All right, we need to update what's happening on 3rd Avenue, how the public safety efforts there are intersecting with transit issues. David's got the latest on Transportation Talk. Well, David, just a follow-up on this ongoing story about police activity on 3rd Avenue, trying to clean up some of the activity that's going on there. A new development where Metro Transit is getting involved. You had a story about this in the Seattle Times. What's going on?
Yeah, they've decided that they're going to close the bus stop on 3rd, and I guess it's technically the 3rd and Pike bus stop, but it's between Pike and Pine on 3rd Avenue.
The northbound
McDonald's.
one.
Yeah, the northbound one near the McDonald's there and the Money Tree.
Yeah.
This is something that has been done before in 2015. They moved this bus stop also.
Yeah.
They have just moved the stop one block to the south, so it's not like transit service is disappearing on that region in that area. But it is, I think, a response to, they feel like this was at the request of the Seattle Police Department. The mayor's office pursued it, got buy-in from Metro Transit to do
Yeah.
this.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thought, I think, is sort of a consolidation of some point, sort of consolidate riders and then open up or kind of open up the area around that block a little bit, which police department feels like is kind of their hardest to deal with. I think I don't think the mayor's office would disagree, and it's hard to argue that it's anything but sort of a temporary approach to the issue down there. But I do think it's sort of maybe the first step in a larger kind of approach that the mayor's office is hoping to take, which is sort of environmental, infrastructural
changes
to that area. I mean, there's so many closed businesses, and there's the Macy's building, which is kind of this wall and empty. I mean, and so I think part of their approach is sort of trying to reshape where people are congregating down there in the hope that makes a difference. At the same time, I think there's a lot of transit advocacy groups and who find this pretty skeptical of this, that this will make all that much of a difference. Any time an area is closed, or we saw this in 12th and Jackson, or
I was going to say,
there's always the question of, well, okay, so where do they go? And the answer often seems to be somewhere else.
Another neighborhood.
Already I was down there the other day, and there weren't very many people at that bus stop, but there were quite a few people a block or two up on a different side street. And so I think this is I think the mayor's office is in a little bit of the kind of let's try and stabilize, tread some water around this until we figure out what our bigger plan is on this, which I'm not sure exactly what the bigger plan is at this point.
Right. I know we had touched on this last week. The SPD said, well, we could potentially enforce this law that they haven't really enforced much at all, this idea of disorderly conduct on a bus or near a transit stop. Any update on that? It doesn't look like they're pursuing that, at least in the near term.
No, I don't think so. I mean, the mayor's office stepped in and quote postponed that. But I haven't gotten any indication that there's any date for that to return. My sense is, at least for now, is postpone means put it on a shelf and kind of let it sit there. So I don't know kind of what they're planning. I mean, again, as we talked about before, it's not that there isn't police activity happening down there.
Sure, of course there is.
That approach would have sort of broadened it a little bit further. And so, I think they are sort of getting to the point now where there's not a lot of, I don't know what the next options are for short-term solutions. They're kind of getting into the territory, which is complicated and which has bedeviled many mayors past, which is what is the long-term solution here? And it'll be, I imagine we will hear more about that in coming weeks.
Looking forward to it. And David, thank you for your reporting on that too. But I wanted to make sure I wrapped up with you and thank you for sharing your pain about Wordle on Twitter today. Did you get through? I'm here for you, man. Are you doing okay? Where are we at?
Well, I usually do pretty well in Wordle, but the ones that always kill me are the ones where you have like 4 letters and then there's like 10 options for what the first letter could be, and so then you're just in a guessing game. That feels annoying to me because it's not. Then you're just guessing. I mean, it could be anything. So I guessed wrong 4 times, and my streak was broken today.
Okay, hang in there, man. Hang in there.
I appreciate it.
We're gonna get through. Thank you for that, David, and thank you to everybody listening out there. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. The podcast is everywhere, wherever you might listen, any platform there. And again, if you are a listener, please do support the show on Patreon. We need you. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media as well. See you later. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2022.